Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of The Rundown with Cowboy Crab. I am the Cowboy Crab, and on today's edition of The Rundown, we got ourselves the Season 38 regular season debriefing and playoff preview. As is tradition around here, we are officially in the postseason for Season 38 of the OFL. Great time to be here in the OFL, as this is where the best of the best play each other, or in case the play-ins, the good and the mediocre, because some of these teams snuck in here by the skin of their teeth. But anyways, we got to start with the teams that didn't make the playoffs. We'll start with the OWC. Keep in mind now with the play-ins now, there's only 5 teams that don't make the playoffs, and usually those teams they're crap. To put it bluntly, they are crappy football teams. So we'll start in dead last in the OWC with a negative point differential of 175. I'm only mentioning this because they're bottom of the barrel. Coming out of the Pacific Division, it's the Roblox Warriors. Warriors, for the love of God, you guys just keep giving me ammunition to shoot at you with the fact that I call you OFL's biggest legacy of failure. And this just keeps helping my case. I mean, you're 0-5 in victory bowls. You have the second worst point differential of the season. He said, if it wasn't for a certain team out in the East, you would have been Tank Bowl champions this year. And you weren't, and it was pretty close too. I mean, 175 to 201 it's a decent chunk. But still, that is just massive, unthinkable numbers for the game of football. So yeah, Warriors, worst team in the Western Conference. Staying in the Pacific Division, though, also 0-6, the Milliken Rams. Rams, you can rest easy knowing you weren't the worst in your division. You were the second worst, and you also didn't get a win, which, my God, this is the biggest downfall I've seen compared to last year, where I had you guys going to the Victory Bowl last year. You had looked like you had finally got everything together. It looked like all of it was coming together, and then you crapped the bed in the playoffs, which can't really say I was surprised. I mean, I did predict you guys. Crab Curse always strikes. Tends to strike twice, with one exception being the Punishers, but they didn't even win it. So technically, it does strike twice, and most of the time it strikes thrice. But yeah, Rams. I mean, you had a negative point differential of 136, and you were the second worst in your division. Your goal for next year is just to win one game. That's where we'll leave it. At number 13, though, in the Plains Division, the Mexico City Aztecs, another team that last year looked really good, looked like they started having it all together, and they lose in the wild card round. Yeah, that's about right for Mexico City. I mean, never made a victory bowl. They tend to have a midseason collapse. And they're also currently the only team in the entire Plains Division that is still winless to the Oklahoma City Twisters, making them their property. So yeah, Aztecs, I mean, next year's goal maybe is win more than one game and have one of those wins probably be against the Twisters, because for some reason, those two teams always play. At number 12, though, the Autorite City Bucks. Yeah, they're coming out of the Mount Division, and yeah, you guys might just want to change your name back to the Tremont Turks, but even then, that might just be bad for the Turk legacy. The Bucks, if memory serves correct, they've had 1 winning record since changing their name. Yeah, if that's not a sign to change back, I don't know what is. They went from they didn't do well the last time they were the Turks, but they had a great regular season. The season they changed after, they just fall apart. I don't know how a team can go from a high playoff contender, regular season king, to living in squallow and barely sneaking by with 1 win. But lastly, the only 2-win team to miss the playoffs out of the Pacific Division is the Saxon Sunbirds. So Pacific Division being the weakest division in the Western Conference, when you take a look at who has actually in the playoffs and who has winning records. The only 2 teams with winning records are also in the playoffs. So Yeah, the Pacific Division really just put all their eggs in one basket when it came to powerhouse teams, and the other four just died. Put it bluntly. But yeah, Sunbirds, your last team in the Western Conference to miss out, and it's probably heartbreaking to know that the other 2-4 teams in the Western Conference got in the playoffs, and you didn't. You even got a forfeit win too, which, I mean, that forfeit win over the Aztecs, that actually probably hurts you because you couldn't get that point differential up and your stats and stuff up to try and maybe get in, but that you had so much going into the season, you hadn't lost a regular season game, and then you just crumble. Oh well. Well, moving on now to the Eastern Conference, we'll start at the bottom, the only winless team in the Eastern Conference, and the season 38 Tank Ball champions, the negative point differential of 201, the Philadelphia Freedom. Billy, if this was like real life sports, the entire city would be calling for all of your heads. All of your heads. Twice over and tripled on Sunday. I don't know if that exaggeration was good or not, but you get the idea. 0-6, the worst point differential I've ever seen. I didn't think point differentials could get into 200, and you guys somehow did it. You got your heads caved in every game you played. Let me just run down the scores for you for their games this season, folks, in case you haven't been paying attention. Week 1, 72-34 loss. Week 2, 59-41 loss. Their closest one, actually. Week 3, 84-25 loss. Week 4, 44-27 loss. Week 3, 72-30 loss. And their rivalry game, sponsored by T-Motion, join my server, 70-43 in the second Super Tank Bowl, voted on by the OFL community. Does it get worse? I don't think it... I genuinely don't know if it's possible to get worse for Philly. It might be. They could lose even worse in all of their games next year, but I honestly don't think it can possibly get worse. Moving on, though, we got a stretch of 2-4 teams. At next out of the Central Division, we're staying in the Central Division after it's where Philly is. The Dredson Dragons. Dragons, you guys look so good at the midway point of the season. You guys looked like you had a real shot. And then you kind of just lost like every game straight. Like you end the year, at the midway point you were 2-1 and you were on a 2-game winning streak. You looked good. The Vikings were definitely a tough game. Realistically, you were probably going to lose. And the Punishers were the true test to see if you were a contender or not, and you lost. Worst of all, you've got a forfeit loss in your last game. You lost 2-0 because you couldn't get enough players and missed the playoffs. That's pathetic. Honestly, pathetic. Moving on, though, number 13, it's Kingo's Rockford Raptors. And honest to God, I wouldn't be sure if I'm in the if I'm in the Raptors organization, I'm not sure if my job is safe. Because guys do another season like this, and Kingo might just chop all of your heads off like the French Revolution. You might come in there with the guillotine like, all right, all of you, line up. I'm chopping all of your heads off and replacing you. Because you guys can't do crap. You're all doing terrible at your jobs. I mean, that might just be the case, so my advice, turn it around. Number 12, staying in the Central Division and the Pacific Division suck this year, man. Especially when you look at the teams that missed the playoffs. They weren't even good at all. The Toronto Bears. Toronto? You continue to be Canada's redheaded. You continue to be the Chargers of Canada. Because the Rattlers brought home a victory bowl. What do you bring to the table? Four losses, and still the property of the Rattlers in the War of the North. I mean, you had a cool victory bowl host, and you got one of the best stadiums. I'll give you that. But outside of that, yeah, your football team isn't exactly the best, but hey, you got a bunch of other stuff going for you, so you can hang your hats on that or something. And lastly, number 11 is a team that came out of nowhere at the end of the year, the Roblox Panthers. Panthers, man, it was looking bleak for you guys. You were 0-4. You lost 4 straight. You lost to the Bolts, Knights, Sky Kings, and Huskies. All 4 of those teams are now in the playoffs. You ended the year on a 2-game winning streak, so there's definitely potential in this team. But if they made the playoffs, they were gonna get stomped. And I'm not gonna be, and there's no other way of going around it. If they made the playoffs this year, they were going to get stomped. Against good teams, they didn't look that great. They lost by only 7 to the Bolts and Sky Kings. Sky Kings are very questionable. We'll get back to them in a second. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely potential in this team, but they definitely got to improve. So for the Panthers, you can. I'm just more excited to see what you guys can do next season and see if you guys can build up that team and maybe have a decent shot at getting into the postseason and beyond. But now it is time to take a look at the playoff matchups. We first have the play-in matchups, of course. So in the Western Conference, 7-seed Rattlers will take on the 10th-seed Ducks, and then the 8th-seed Raiders will take on the 9th-seed Toros. And then in the Eastern Conference, 7-seed Destroyers will take on the 10th-seed Greats, and then the battle for Florida, the 8th-seed Firecats take on the 9-seed Bolts. So it's going to be a very interesting play-in indeed. So I'll go ahead and get my predictions on that. So for the Western Conference, I have the Rattlers winning, and then in an upset, I think the Toros can get the win over the Raiders. My reasoning for going with the Rattlers is pretty simple. They're playing the Ducks. I mean, honestly, the Ducks did not. It feels like they're one of the teams that people point and look at. Look at the play-in system. Terrible. Because a 2-4 team, two of the 2-4 teams making the playoffs, and their only wins aren't even close. So I feel like it's pretty safe to say the Rattlers are probably going to win this. As for the Raiders and Toros, I mean, for the Raiders, their only 3 wins are beating up on bad teams. Warriors, Sunbirds, and Rams. 3 teams they've lost to are playoff teams. Spartans, Bolts, and Twisters. And that Twisters team they lost to was the fresh off the fire sale in Oklahoma City. So, very suspect team, in my opinion, which is why I'm going with the Toros. I mean, the Toros, they've competed, and they even beat the Twisters at their peak. That's mostly the reason I'm going with them. The teams that they've lost to, it's been close with, except for the Aztecs. I don't know what happened with the Aztecs, but honestly, this is a toss-up, and I feel like the Toros can probably win this game. They competed with the Bruisers, which honestly I feel like is probably good enough to give them this win here and move on to play in the wildcard round. For the Eastern Conference, I have the Destroyers and Firecats. Now, for the Destroyers, it's really surprising they kind of got here. Destroyers are kind of the team where it's like when you're good, you notice. When they're not good, you notice. When they're in the middle, you don't really notice them. You can say that about a lot of teams, though. But the Destroyers, they've also not played that many good teams. Well, they've not won against many good teams. I'll say it that way. They had to start the season though against the Snowhawks and Huskies. That is just 2 tough games for anybody. And the only games they've lost were games to undefeated teams. They've lost to the Snowhawks, Huskies, and Knights, the 3 undefeated teams of the Eastern Conference. But they got wins over the Rams, Raptors, and Sentinels. The Sentinels, however, I would like to point out in the tavern, I did make a mistake saying Relly was the quarterback for the Sentinels. I forgot he resigned. That's on me. I'm shocked nobody pointed that out. But yeah. So I got the Destroyers winning over the Greats. Now for Canton, mainly the reason I'm going against them is It's mostly just because it's really hard to tell how this team really is when their last two games are a 6-51 loss to the Snowhawks and then a 2-0 win. So you really got no idea what you're working with. So I'm just going to go with the Destroyers, and I think they'll get onto the wild card round. Now, for the Battle of Miami, Bolts, Firecats. This was an interesting one. The Bolts, they got wins over the Panthers, Raiders, and Freedom. Losses to the Firecats, Knights, and Phoenix. Firecats, they got losses to the Knights, Phoenix, Punishers, with wins over the Bolts, Aztecs, and Rams. But I'm going with the Firecats, mostly just off reputation of Kelvin. Man won the Victory Bowl last season, and is it possible he can lead them to the Victory Bowl again with this team hosting? I don't think so. Just considering the teams he's going to have to play if he were able to make it, I don't think he's going to make it all the way there, but I definitely think that the Firecats will get out of the play-ins and make it to the wild card round. Now for the wild card games, this is what I've got. Snowhawks versus Destroyers, Knights versus Firecats, Huskies versus Phoenix, and Punishers versus Sentinels. Those last two games were decided in the playoff draft. So, and then for the OWC, Vikings Rattlers, Spartans Toros, Sky Kings Twisters, and Bruisers Jack Rabbits. So, for my predictions of those games, I have the Snowhawks beating the Destroyers. I have the Knights beating the Firecats, Huskies beating the Phoenix, and then the Punishers beating the Sentinels. I know it just sounds like I'm just picking the top four teams because they're the top four, but I mean, to be honest, it's really hard to see any of those teams beating them. The Firecats, I'd say they're probably the closest to standing a chance, mostly because of Kelvin. But I mean, for the Phoenix, it's mostly that early season stuff that got them here, because they have looked terrible since they lost. They got that win over the Bolts, but a nail-biter loss to the Twisters and losing to the Panthers. Their first win of the season. Hard for me to believe in the Phoenix. And then for the Punishers and Sentinels, I mean, similar thing. Relly gone from the Sentinels. Hard to believe in the Sentinels. So going Punishers. For the Western Conference, I got the Vikings beating the Rattlers. Sorry, Rattlers, you're not repeating. Spartans beating the Toros. This is probably going to make me sound like a homer, but I have the Twisters beating the Sky Kings in the upset of the wild card round. There's always one, sometimes two, and 1 year 3. But it's for the Sky Kings, just like the Minnesota Vikings. Like, yeah, they have a winning record. Yeah, they're 5-1, but they had a negative point differential at one point. They now have a flat line of 0 point differential. Now they are just so suspect. It's hard to understand them. Plus their wins out of all their wins, only one of them is to a team with a winning record. 2 of them with a team with 500 record. They beat the Rams, Jackrabbits, Panthers, Rattlers, and Ducks. And they lost badly to the Bruisers. So it's just I just feel like the Twisters, I feel like they, in those last 3 games, after everything went up for sale, everything went on fire, they competed and they fought. And I just got this feeling that the Twisters will get hot at this time. They competed with the Vikings for a while, but the Vikings are just a monster right now in the Western Conference. And it was really unlikely that they were going to beat them. But they didn't get blown out. They made it. They were giving them everything they got. And for that, I just feel like the Twisters are going to beat the Sky Kings. And then lastly, Bruisers versus Jackrabbits. I have the Bruisers winning. For the divisional round of the Eastern Conference, I have the Snowhawks versus Punishers, Knights versus Huskies. And for the Western Conference, it'll be the Vikings versus Twisters and Spartans versus Bruisers, since we're still doing it off freaking divisional seeding. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting, to say the least, with the way I have it seeded out. A Red River rivalry rematch in the playoffs. Not the first time that's happened, but we'll start with the Eastern Conference. Making it to the Eastern Conference Championship, I have the Snowhawks and Huskies. Making it to the Conference Championship, and then for the West, for the divisional round in the OWC, I have the Vikings and Spartans. And then for the conference championship games, I have games in the Eastern Conference, Snowhawks versus Huskies. I have the Huskies winning. And then for the Western Conference, I have the Spartans beating the Vikings. So my Victory Bowl 33 prediction is the Corinth Spartans versus the Highland Huskies. And who do I have winning? I have the Corinth Spartans winning the Season 38 Victory Bowl. It's a long shot, plus the crab curse is never on my side. So how long will it be until I tear up this virtual bracket? Probably a day. Honestly, probably maybe 2 days. So I think that is where we'll wrap up this episode of the Rundown here for you folks. Representing Team Motion, I'm the Cowboy Crab saying so long, everybody.